from Justice Whitaker, and we are here tonight with Sigin Ojulu, and
What's
such
up?
a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, always a pleasure to get the dialogue with you, mind expanding, creative, and yeah, thanks for being here. Where are you coming to us from? Where are you at?
I'm in Los Angeles right now at the moment. It's sunny and people aren't wearing their masks.
We're all in the different,
So,
I know, everything's a little different. It's the
yeah.
same in Brooklyn, except it's not sunny because we're right at that East Coast, West Coast divide right now. So,
Is it like cold? What is the weather right now?
oh yeah, it's snowy. It's like 30 degrees. It snowed last night. Like, it's a really good reason to stay in your home, along with all the other reasons to stay in your home. But yeah, we're just in a creative den out here, just working and creating beautiful things as much as we can. So it's been good. Yeah, it's been
Love
good.
to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. So let's tell the community a little bit about what you are into creatively. I would love to hear, I know you're not really just an LA-based person, you're really global. So I want to get into all of those wonderful things that you bring us and bring the world. But in the realm of cinema, what is your experience? Do you make films? How did you learn? Tell me about yourself as a filmmaker.
Sure. Yeah, so let's see. I basically don't really have a background in film. I was like trying to go to school essentially to be an economist because that's like the only option that you have as an African. It's like lawyer, doctor, engineer, or economist. And so I was like, I'll do that. And like in my classes, I basically was just daydreaming about the stories in my head, and just because I didn't see myself reflected at all in television, just in media in general. And so I started pursuing filmmaking as a way to offer different stories and different types of representation. And so I've directed, I've acted, I had like quite a bit of experience modeling in front of the camera. So kind of those skills transferred over. But then I came behind the camera and was like, I also have a story to tell. So been doing that, been living in LA and grinding,
Do you have a preference? Like, I have only done a little bit of acting. I acted when I was a child, but now I'm like voice of the auteur behind the camera. Like, that's just my joint, let me write it, let me create it. I do sometimes want to get my little Spike moments where I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I'm going to have my little cameos here and there, but
get the Spike moments. Yes.
I don't see myself doing a Mookie role for a whole film for myself, but like for yourself as an actor, how does it feel? Do you have a preference? Do you only like acting your own work, or how does it feel reading other people's lines? Like, what's the vibe of that?
I love, I'm multi-hyphenate. So I love both. I think it really depends on the project, as you know. Like, I love acting because it is kind of one of the only jobs where you can literally it's like a catharsis. Like, you have permission to feel and you have permission to just sort of have empathy, which I think there's a lack of in this world. We get so caught up in like our own minds, and there's a lot of trauma. There's compound trauma that's happening all over the world. And so for acting, if it's a good script, if it's a good story, if it's an interesting character, it's always fun for me as an empath to go into other people's shoes, and, with the directing stuff, that is just kind of a byproduct of me knowing that nobody else can tell my story. Like, knowing that, in a lot of like African stories and a lot of the stories that I'm interested in, I think like with most filmmakers and most auteurs, they are auteurs because nobody else can tell their story. But I love being directed by like amazing directors and having that permission to just like feel and be. I think that's part of what's beautiful about art in general.
Yeah, that's dope. I love the fluidity has to be there. I love you describing sort of the value of being an empath in the process of really all of this storytelling. You brought it up as an actor, but I'm like a heavy empath. I'll cry in every film. I'm just like, I'm in it.
Yes.
Half the time I'm like, yeah, it's a great story. But half the time I'm like, wow, these filmmakers made this. This is,
right.
They did this. Yes.
How dare they? And especially people like Shonda, right? People like Ava DuVernay, where you're like, they did it again. They brought me in.
Yeah, they did it again. By that time, I think it's more just like, oh, their career is this dope. Okay, they're at this whole, it's like the breadth of it. It still makes me want to cry because I'm just like, dang, Ava, all those journeys are so beautiful. But the empathy does play a role, for us as artists. And then I think everybody probably, at least in this community, can identify with what you're saying about our stories, our voice, who tells them. So you're talking about African stories. So where's your sort of familial background? What's your connection to the continent? This series is about understanding the diaspora and how we can like reconnect some of the things that I at least personally see have been really damaged in terms of that tissue between the diasporic communities and the continent, So, so what's your story? Where do you fall in that realm? And I think there's a lot of valuable angles and perceptions.
Yeah, for sure. I'm from Sudan. I was born in Sudan, and then, it split into two countries. So now I'm Sudanese and South Sudanese. And so that's kind of my connection to the continent. I came to the US as a refugee. And so, I've been here in the US for quite some time now. And I feel kind of, I was just talking with a friend about this because we were like, we're kind of rootless, like first generation, second generation, I guess, immigrants. It's like, we don't, like, I'm connected to Sudan. I can speak my language. I can cook the foods, blah, blah, blah. But when I go there, I'm still, they can tell. They can tell the way that you walk, the way that you dress. Even if you, and like here in the US, like people know that I'm also, or they sort of assume that I'm not American, which they are correct, but I also just feel very American. Like I don't really have an accent. And then it's the question of like, what is Blackness? Like, what is that experience? So yeah, I think it's great. I think in this generation, there's a lot of like, third world kids, or I guess fourth world. I don't know what that term is, but people who are kind of rooted in so many different places and have kind of a bunch of different identities. And I know that it's the same for you, I'm sure, being like a mixed person, born in the US, but having different identities,
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I mean, the idea of the rootless is really interesting. In some ways, I feel like all Black people in America are rootless. I mean, I think that there's part of that. And it's like, we're not rootless, but the roots are shallow. They're of that kind of plant where it's like, if you tug too hard, then you just displace. You're just a displaced person, and that's happening in so many different in ways, but what you say about me, myself being mixed, and having like a father who was very present. He's African-American, very sort of traditional story in some ways from the South, Northern migration stuff, having a white mom. That is what drove me into the world, and especially to Africa, to be like, yeah, I'm going to go live in Johannesburg. I'm going to go live in Accra. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to figure this out, and I've had all of those experiences, in of course, in Joburg, they're like, oh, you're colored, you're mixed, you're colored. And that's a word to describe the ethnicity, the group, of the colored people, the mix. They're half Dutch, they're half Black, but it's been hundreds of years like that, I mean? And mostly interbreeding. And so they're just like colored. And I'm like, nah, bruh, I'm Black. I don't even care about, what I mean? It's just so many perspectives and perceptions. You're like, yeah, in America, I'm Black, right? So that's not going to change. But here you are. And he's like, yeah, well, you're colored, and you're just like, yeah, well, it's not 1960.
So but in some ways it sort of is. It's interesting how like history is always reified. So like, even if we're not called like Negroes or whatever, like there's different ways that people like code their language. And that's part of the interesting thing about being just Pan-Africanism in general. Like Blackness means something completely different in the US than it does in Brazil. you know, like there's like the Dominican people, like what are y'all, you know, and like they have their own perception of
Right.
who they are in certain circumstances, and we all kind of have to still code switch in a lot of different ways. And you know, like I think that's kind of the blessing and the curse about us. Like sometimes we are very much lauded for Blackness. I know as like a dark skinned, you know, Nubian African, we're in a moment right now where people sort of celebrate my Blackness or my queendom or whatever. But in other ways, and like very recently ago, like it's not like it hasn't been good. It has not. It's been a point of like contention and a point and kind of like been weaponized against me. And I think those can really change too, depending on like the moment. So it really just like depends on so many things.
Yeah. And I think that like that idea of your Blackness for whatever it is, for whoever, it can be hard to hold on to at times. It can be stripped from you in times, and other times push right back on. You know, it's like where you want to just own it, be it, but then there's so many spaces, like you said, where it's like that's a threat, or that's a, you know, you get encouraged to downplay. Oh man, with this executive, is he really going to want to hear, you know? And so the code switching in different ways that it's like, oh wait, well, I'm going to ABC today.
Let's put on our white voice.
Yeah. Who was it? Kenya has a great story. Kenya has a great story about what his pitch outfit used to be when he was like Kenya Barris. He talks about having a pitch outfit where he was like, I always had this, you know. And so it's like how, you know, and it's not just holding on to your Blackness. Sometimes it's just holding on to who you are in general and in different settings, whether it's in the entertainment business or in this world. Like it can be hard to hold on to, you know, who you are, who you feel you are, who you want to be, who you're growing towards. That's part of the challenge, you know, for all of us, I think. So how does that inform your work as a filmmaker, your sense of, you know, rootlessness, your sense of your African identity? Are your films about African people? Are your films like focused on that? Both, are they on the continent? Are they here? Like how does your content sort of represent some of that identity?
Yeah, I think, you know, we're at a really particular time in entertainment and kind of like, again, the valuing of Blackness and Black stories. And I've always been consistent in the types of stories that I want to tell, which is a centering on Africa and a centering on like Black voices and underrepresented voices. Like, I think just by the nature of, you know, growing up and being Sudanese, we have a huge history of science and technology and just STEM in general. And so things like Black Panther meant something different to me. It wasn't just like seeing all that melanin, which was great, but it was also just the fact that it was like portraying us in, it's not like modernity, but it was like Afrofuturism essentially. But what I'm really focused on when I'm making content and just trying to be very thoughtful of is also the fact that I don't like, and you can tell me if you've experienced different, but I haven't actually seen any films that like in a commercial way really humanize Africans. In a way that's not just like this fantastical, like magical realism. We're always painted as these magical people. And it's like, nah, like we have trauma, like we have, you know, just they're mundane, like village Black people. And I think that's kind of the problem. It's like, we're either nothing or we're like these kings and queens. And it's like, there's a wealth, you know, of stories and people in between. So everything that I try to, like my stories, you know, I'm working on this film in Kenya about these Big Bang African, you know, nerds, basically computer scientists who like take on this terrorist organization, and it's a comedy. Like it's literally just like talking about how these kids are like college seniors, kind of like Mean Girls, where they're just going, like they have crushes on people. They like literally don't know what to do with their lives. That like there's no magic in it. It's just them living their lives. And I think that's what we need more of, and particularly in East Africa. And obviously because of my identity, I love what's going on in Nigeria. And I'm so glad that like, you know, a lot of these streaming platforms are putting money into the continent and into Black stories in general. But I think we just need, my contribution to this medium is providing my identity. I think those are the best filmmakers, where you're just like, this is my authentic truth. I don't see it anywhere else. I want to see it. I think there's a market for it. And I think that's what we need. Like, it's great to have superhero movies, but that's, you know, like, who were the like African people behind the camera? Like, think about that, right? There are a lot of like actors for sure, but it's also just like, and it goes into the dynamics between African-American, African, kind of this like slippery sort of like, now that we sort of have some ownership, like what is the, what's the accountability that we all have for each other, like within our community and Pan-Africanism and all of that. So to answer your question, I just want to bring more, it's not even like authenticity, because what the hell does that mean? It's like just standard stories that humanize the little guy as well, the little hero.
Yeah, no, I hear you exactly. One of our other guests at the Table Talk series, Togbe Gavua, is a good friend of mine in Ghana, and his first feature film, Lucky, is also just like university kids, like we need to get this money, we need to go on this date, we on this Twitter troll, you know what I mean? And I love seeing those stories, because that was my experience when I went there. I was in college, I was living with those people, I was just having an experience where it was humanizing. And like, as a young Black American in my 20s, I hadn't had I had not seen that anywhere. Like you said, everything was fantastical. Everything, even in cinema, is like so many of the stories, you know, even fantastical struggle stories, you know, even it's like all of that was suddenly like, oh, I'm on a college campus. This is really different. This is just really different than all of those things. So I love that's where sort of at least that piece is, and we do need more of that. And the Black Panther thing, I mean, the superhero thing, like the whole fantastical interpretation, there's so much to unpack there. But I think that one of the things that you're really hinting at, which is like, you know, the gaze, the American Western gaze on African content, obviously, as someone who grew up in America and has spent a lot of time in the continent, writes a lot of stories that are based there. Most of them are still including an American character, an American voice, so that I can sort of write myself and my own experiences and my own gaze into that world. So I'm not trying to just put like some completely flipped experience. And of course, we push those limits on all the different sides, and you're writing a screenplay, you're writing all the voices nonetheless. But, you know, I think there's something there, because you're saying we need to be aware of that in our own Pan-African communities and in our own spaces. And I just think we have to like build those spaces within which we can be aware, because you know, the process of like sharing work, criticizing our work in a safe, critical space where you're like, wait, are you just trying to get the one other film that they're going to make that might be, you know, Black horror this year or whatever it is, you know, and all of those things that permeate and destroy the ability to really build like a dope Black film movement worldwide is what it really needs to be, you know, because every other cultural sort of revolution in cinema has happened in that way, you know, and like our cultural revolution in cinema is absent. It's like, it's rootless, you know what I mean? It's here, it's there. There's Nigeria springing up, but then right next door, Ghana is like, yo, we just trying to build. Why is it not, you know? And so that's like happening just there. And now we're over here trying to get a piece, like, you know, and so, I mean, Nigerian films were laughed at and are laughed at You know what I mean? In so many contexts, by Black people, by white people, by people that are like, what is this? The video feel of it. There's so many things, but it's like, if you peer through that, if you look at the stories being told, and then you give the production and start looking at the work that comes once Netflix comes, then you're like, whoa, this is
but not even just when Netflix comes in, right? Like the reason why Nollywood is what it is because there's an audience for it.
Of
like
course.
They don't need Netflix, and they certainly do not need the West to sort of like legitimate, you know, they're already legitimate. And I think it's like, I don't know what Tyler Perry did too, where he had this like niche sort of market, and maybe it wasn't Hollywood standard. And like, I know everybody's got their own type of feeling about Tyler Perry content.
Of course.
But he came to Hollywood and he was like, here's my stuff. And they didn't listen to him. So he took his ass back to Atlanta and built an empire because he had an audience. And I think that's where it is. Like the content that Black people make globally it has an audience. Like Black purchasing power is huge, you know?
Exactly.
And
exactly.
I think like it kind of goes to what you're saying as well. Like we need to be able to have ownership, which is what Tyler Perry talks about. We need to be able to like, but within, especially as creators, like my point is that there's like a slippery slope between like cultural exchange and cultural appropriation.
Yes.
Right. When it comes to Blackness around the globe. And like, I think Black is King is like one of those things.
Course.
Like,
we talked.
And so it's just like, as long as there is, you know, real effort in really trying to like make sure that we in whatever identities we have can sort of create space where we can all thrive. And the end goal is just to like, I don't know, I want everybody to eat, right? Like if I'm making it, I want to like open the door for different types of content that I know I definitely couldn't make, right? It's not like a competition. It's literally just like,
exactly,
you know, just open up the doors. Like,
exactly. And that's sort of
props. That's it.
And that's what I was getting at, is like when Netflix comes in and then they make this one piece, like the piece that everyone in the West wants to see, that's just another version of just cutting out so many other, you know, and like you said, I mean, it's really about do for self. And I think we need to be building those networks and those opportunities, the production companies, the resources, financing, all that stuff amongst ourselves as best we can, because there's just still so much growth that needs to happen. Like the relationship between Black creatives and Hollywood in any of those streamers is just still so much of just, you know, being led around by the chomp in your mouth. You know what I mean? We're not these autonomous beings. And when we are, and anyone that wants to point to a film and say, well, didn't you see Judas and the Black Messiah, which I saw last night, and it's slamming.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet. I want to see that.
But
love me some Daniel Kaluuya. Oof.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's a beautiful film. But those are like spikes, right? There's just like these moments of agency and like these moments of voice that are coming out, and these moments of collaboration, and the moments become more and more frequent. So that's how we know we're moving towards something. But I still think everything you're saying is so important, because if we don't create amongst each other, and if we don't have that dialogue amongst each other, then it's always going to be fragile. Like Black people's relationships are so fragile because we don't really know. Like we don't know anything about being in Sudan. We don't know anything about these different things. And
that's a generalization. There are a lot of people that do. There's a lot of people.
There are, of course, that's a generalization. That is, but I think that we speak in generalizations. I'm speaking in this generalization because there are weak links, Sigin, between the continent and the Black Americans. Like we don't flow right. Like like, you know, I taught Dominican kids. I taught high school for 10 years or 8 years. You know, the Dominican kids didn't want to be called Black. All right, fine. You want to be called Dominican. You alluded to that earlier, you know, cool. But like, who are you? And like, are we ever going to be able to unpack the impacts of slavery on your people if you won't even admit that you came from Africans, like in your everyday, like on the block, like we're just here in the Bronx, like we're just parlaying. I'm over here in Southside Williamsburg. Nah, we ain't Black. Like that's a long way to go. And if you contrast that with the educated, young, beautiful Black bohemian artist that knows about Sudan and is like, yeah, we need to go out there and connect with, like, yeah, it's polar opposites. But like, sadly, the numbers, because of the history and especially the way I feel about Americans, and also when you go to these other, like you said, developing third world, fourth world, you know, the education isn't there. The exposure isn't there. Go ask people in the town, in the yard in Jamaica about Sudan and what they really know. They don't know, you know, they might know it's close to Ethiopia because they on some Rasta, you know, that's a different Black power. That's a different Black power. And that's beautiful too. But, you know, I mean, there is a lack of education, and the lack of education, I think, is hurting our ability to have that real Pan-Africanism. And I think the intellectual and creative communities sometimes leave the working class communities behind when we start building these relationships, you know, and it's like, yeah, we all Black and we're doing this and it's all, but there's still a lot of folks that are just like in their own hood and they don't care about, you know, and how do we reach those people? Because in Nigeria, like, they reached their own hoods in a beautiful way, you know, they found the content that connected and, you know, all those things. So I just think it's an uphill battle. And I agree with you about the appropriation. You know, it's huge and it's a super slippery slope. You know, is that what you felt like when you watched Black is King? I think Black is King is such a beautiful piece of content to help facilitate the conversation, because it's complex. It's more complex than I think most people even know when they watch it, you know? Yeah. But like, is that how you felt?
I think, you know, from my own conversations and from my own like collection of data and different like demographics, like straight up just talking with my African friends and my African American friends, there's a clear divide of thoughts about that. I think that what I'll say about this is that, again, like, it goes back to the difference between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation. I think exchange in general is a natural thing. Like, there are nomadic people, right? All over the world. I think that, like, you know, borders are artificial in general, and people have been traveling and sort of like exchanging human stories and like goods and arts and like different, you know, mechanisms, like mathematical systems and, you know, financial systems, stuff like that. So I think there's cultural exchanges is natural. Where appropriation comes in is when, like, when you take something that is not maybe inherently your culture, let's say braids, like Kim Kardashian, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Kim Kardashian created braids, and on top of that, like, gets monetized and that person gets paid for it, and like all of that value is attributed to them. So when we look at things like, and that's a problem, I think we can all agree that that's a problem in general, like regardless of, not irregardless of race, like in this context, race does matter, but in the context of like Black people, when you think about things like Black is King, which artists can you name besides Beyonce that were a part of that, which was like, yes, there were, you know, cultural sort of like artifacts that were African American, but I think like there were large elements that were also African, but nobody really knows like every single dance, like which tribe was it, which country was it even in, like which region, can you even point that? No, you just know Beyonce, who got paid for it. Yes, there were some like mega stars in you know, coming from the continent, but it's like the LeBron James thing. Like, just because LeBron James and like these 1% like African American or Black people are doing really well does not mean that like the community is doing well. And so like that is sort of a disavowal in a sense. If you can't even, like, Beyonce's got money, you can tell us where you took this stuff from. So I think, you know, as artists, especially somebody like her who's she's profound, she's an entertainer, she's an amazing example for just like hard workers, Black women, and is it's hard for me to criticize anything like that, but there is, like, as an African as well, it's just sort of like, I if you're gonna uplift Africanness, like, tell me where in Africa like any of these things are coming from. So I think that's what I mean, where it's a little bit of a slippery slope. I think we just need to have a little bit more due diligence to be able to create content that has integrity for all of Blackness, specifically if you're taking it from a different type of Blackness. I'm not about to go into like the Dominican Republic or like Jamaican communities and be like, oh, this dish is amazing, and now it's like Sudanese, and and you didn't even know it was Jamaican. That's like that's mad disrespectful, you know. That's cultural appropriation. So I just think we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, and I think the point that you are making too about the ownership and like how the credit and is given, you know, is really important, because I think a lot of things, it feels like a weird line. It's like, oh wait, what? Jamaica? What's she talking about? I can't listen to reggae music. Is that what you're saying? And it's like, no, yeah. We're not saying that. You can't. It's not that you can't, you know, appreciate and experience, and even if you want for creative, experiential, whatever,
partake,
spiritual, exchange. Right, exactly. Partake and exchange, exactly, yeah. You know, but it's when you start saying or failing to say and failing to identify the beautiful origins of what you are using, or, you know, and that doesn't even have to be done in the film. It has in the press, in the thing, there's so many other outlets for that. Like, let's make an interactive Black is King app where it's just like, boom, and then there's scenes from the thing and you can click, and like, you know, I mean, that's just me coming off the top, but it's like, there's a million things that Beyonce could have done if this was an issue that she was thinking at the front of her mind. You know what? I don't want to just scoop up all these images and all these dope ass African talents and put them in a block of names this big on the credits,
and
like
then monetize it.
Any of them. And then of course make tons of money off of it, which is going towards, they got the single payment on production day and she gets the infinite payment ongoing. So I hear exactly. And for me, you know, I mean, I'm very much of two minds. It's of one of the many places where, you know, you feel that divide. You feel the, it's tough. I felt the exact same way you did long before Black is King about Beyonce and Jay. When they did their Tuki Buki, they did their On the Run tour too. And the cover was them with the motorcycle, with the longhorn.
Which is an iconic image. Iconic.
Which is one of the most iconic images in all of African cinema. For all of those of you who are watching and are not up on the film Tuki Buki, take the time to go, you know, acquire, find, learn. It's a beautiful piece of cinema out of Senegal in the 70s. And, you know, and yeah, they just didn't, there was just nothing. It was just them. And I was like, yo, this is Tuki Buki. And like, and I think that's the thing is, and that's what I was saying too, earlier, where it's like some people just don't know. And when people don't know about Sudan, then people think they can take Sudanese things and call them their own. And when people don't know about Tuki Buki, they think that they can just cut and then push it out there and call it their own. So I felt the same way, you know, but also as a Black American who has been, you know, just struggled to connect with Africa and who has been privileged to be able to just like scrap pennies to make moves when I was young and do different things that allowed me to have certain experiences that I know many Black Americans don't, then there's a certain kind of feeling that comes from watching that type of celebration.
Totally.
What, you know,
and we want to celebrate with you. We want to celebrate with you.
No, I hear you. Right.
I think one thing I'll say is, first of all, when you got that much money, it's not that hard to like even just like cite where these things are coming from. You got whole teams. It's not hard. I think a really good example is Ava DuVernay, who she does autobiographic like content, like the real shit where it's just like we know who these people are. So like when they see us, right, these are people's actual lives, but we know their names, right? Corey Wise, Kevin Richardson, like Antron McCrae. Like I don't know anything about that culture, but I know their names. I know their names, and even after
Experience.
the filming, their experiences, where they came
Right.
from, even
Right.
afterwards, there were funds set up for these people. Like they were part of the entire, like that's, I think that's filmmaking with integrity, because you're not just using people. These are people's, this is somebody's life, right?
Exactly.
They're part of that journey and part of that experience. And yeah, like they all made money, right? But also these people weren't just being used. And I think when you really, I don't think that like Beyonce or her team or whatever were trying to be malicious. I think that like capitalism can sort of like fuck around with a lot of people's empathy probably, but it's just, we are going to get to a point where we do have ownership. Like we do as Black people have like enough ownership where we don't have to lean into all of these studios that don't really take us seriously or don't understand our craft or whatever. And I think that's starting with things like Macro. I think, like, Shondaland, all these things. And that's great. But we also, as a community, have to understand, and there's like Pan-Africanism talks about this, like all these brilliant people who are Black, and they all have different ideologies of how we should organize ourselves, but they, they also kind of clashed. And so it's just like, we as creators have to have some sort of, like some sort of social contract. I don't even know what it would look like, but as of right now, what's happening is appropriation in my book.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And that's, that is what it is. I think there's been a lot of times in the past, whether it's, what we're seeing with the Panthers trying to bring people together, in the Judas and the Black Messiah, but just times when, the LA Rebellion movement in Black cinema, there's been times when Black artists and other Black people, Black revolutionaries, Black activists, Black parents, have come together to start forming these things. And it's weird. We're like at an all-time high because of social media. But at the same time, I think it's one of those, be careful what's in your own feed. Like if you're just in your own feed, you're like, yo, Black people are popping right now. Look at all these Black directors. Yo, Black directors, Black screenwriters, this is dope. And it's like, it's because that's flooding. You're not getting an actual sample of the world. You're getting a sample of your preferences, And so
and that's why algorithms are really dangerous, actually.
Oh, they're the worst. Oh, yeah, exactly. They entrap us from seeing. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about how that impacted, the politics of this country, so many things, the algorithm, being in our own feed. That's the whole thing with the people at the Capitol, right? Like we don't understand each other. And that's because we all are just living in our own feed. And then those people storm the Capitol and then they come out talking like they're Black Panthers, talking about we're disenfranchised. This is the revolution. And I'm like, wait, what? That's what we say. And so that means if we're saying the same thing as those angry ass white people, then we probably have more similarities than we even realize, and how can we build down these walls? And that's American politics, but Black politics has that same issue, you know what I mean? Where it's like, we all talking about the same thing, but then nobody's talking about it together, and so. It's a lot to it, but hey, here we are talking about it, and that's one of the beautiful things that small movements, and in that vein, like thank you to the Black Film Allegiance, to Elan, to Jasmine, to Richmond, who's helping with our cutting, you know what I mean, and everything to just facilitate. It takes human power. It takes human energy and time to care to start even the smallest little, pieces. So shout out to everybody that allowed for that. And especially to you for, giving us a piece of your time.
Of course. This is dope. This is dope. I love this. It's all about solutions and growing, quite honestly. I think we're in a very beautiful spot, very traumatic, crazy point in history, but I think there's a lot of silver linings out of this, and this is great. It's good to be here.
Bless up. Cool. Well, we'll talk more in the future. Stay in touch, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.